servants here gathered in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, and to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, yeah, man.
Honourable House now resume its sitting. The call of the roll, please.
Mr. Charles, Mr. Witter, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Floyd Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Golding, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mrs. Anne-Marie Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Mr. Speaker, we will be having a statement. The Minister of Transport and Mining. Is it mining and transport? Transport and I thought you were has laid hands on us suddenly and has advised that he wishes to make a statement today. So, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to request of him this. I suspect he would have prepared himself in time with a copy of the statement. It's in transit.
Yes, sir. But I have the advance copy.
Minister Warmington.
He got held up with the problems of transport.
Minister Montague.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, there has been a withdrawal of service by JUTC drivers. As a means of background, there was a confrontation between a taxi operator and a JUTC driver last night. The taxi operator was stabbed and then pronounced dead at hospital. The JUTC driver has since turned himself in to the police. Later on last night, a JUTC driver mechanic, while working on a bus, was shot and unfortunately died. Since then, there has been many threats and rumors that have been circulated, especially on social media. As a result, the JUTC drivers are in fear of their lives. We have had meetings with the unions, drivers, ministry staff, and the police. We have consulted with the police, who have established a presence at all depots and along the routes. This is to provide assurance to the taxi operators, JUTC drivers, as well as to the traveling public. Mr. Speaker, we have consulted with the various taxi associations in the KMTR and in Kota. They have assured of normal service by their members. We have briefed the opposition spokesman as well. Indeed, many other stakeholders have also been briefed. Mr. Speaker, at this time we appeal for calm, and I cannot imagine, Mr. Speaker, we are asking persons not to create voice notes that seek to create panic and spread rumors. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, the management of the JUTC is having a meeting with the drivers and their unions so as to resume service as soon as it is humanly possible. But the constant rumors and allegations are not helping. Mr. Speaker, let me express my profound regret at the loss of life of the two persons. I cannot imagine the grief and the pain the family is going through at this time. Let us keep them in our prayers. For the stranded commuters, we seek their continued patience, as many persons, the police and others, have deployed vehicles to assist them in getting home. Many private motorists have rallied to the call to be their brothers and sisters' keepers and have been transporting strangers. This display of civic mindedness is the best of Jamaica on show. We commend and thank them, as in these challenging times, our real and true spirit always comes to the fore. We appeal to all Jamaicans to be calm and lend a helping hand where they can. We urge peace, calm, and a return to normalcy as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to monitor and update the country with this unfolding situation. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Speaker, seek your permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, we too on this side, we're seeing crime and violence has now affected another sector. And we also, with the minister and the government, express condolences not only to those who have been affected directly, but also the traveling public
that has been affected since this morning. Mr. Speaker, we have been seeing chaos on the road for quite a while, and we're also pleading on this side for some normalcy to take place, because as we have gotten reports of schools having to close early because of the lack of transportation, but also for those within the sector to be mindful that, while they're allowing their voices to be heard, that they are much more out there being affected by what is happening. Well, Mr. Speaker, we urge the police to get to the bottom of the 2 murders that took place, as 2 families have been affected, but also to ensure that there's safety not only for those who are in the sector itself, the transport sector, but also for the traveling public. And we still stand by my original statement of giving assistance wherever can be given to the minister and the sector itself, that normalcy can be brought to it. But we also urge, Minister, that the long-awaiting Road Traffic Act and the other amenities that come with it that can help with enforcement and regulation. And we on this side have asked that there be a comprehensive transport plan, because we know that the situation with the JUTC is a long-standing one, but one that is getting even worse. So when we see the withdrawal of the JUTC now from the routes, the effect that it has on the overall transport sector in the KMTI, and that, we hope that good sense will prevail, and hope that the police get to the bottom of what has taken place, and nothing like this will continue to affect the transport sector. If it pleases you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for his statement, for the opposition spokesman's rejoinder. Today it has been made clear to me that, as he said, many schools have let off early because of the difficulties of transportation. That is exactly what should not happen. And I'm appealing to the Minister and to the Minister in charge of Education to strengthen their advice in the event that this situation continues, because particularly in the corporate area with the inclement weather, there are hundreds and more of parents whose children are out of class, told to leave school with the normal transportation arrangements in disarray, and therefore compounding a problem rather than helping to solve it. And it's part of an anxiety that easily overtakes us, one can understand, but at the same time, the safest place for a child until proper transportation arrangements are made is at school. And I am just asking that a special word of advice go to the school officials in this regard. There's one other issue that I'd like to raise pertinent to this. Mr. Speaker, I too long for the institution of the new Road Traffic Act. But there is an area of road traffic maintenance and advancement that the Act really is not replete in dealing with. There are thousands of people driving on the roads in Jamaica who have never taken an honest driving test. And there are equally number, you see them on the roads, who are temperamentally and emotionally unstable and should not be driving a motor vehicle. And none of us are tested in this regard. And I'm urging, as the Minister makes his earnest efforts, and the government, all of us, to regularize what is an increasingly congested and, I would say, chaotic transportation system, public and private, that we review very carefully the provisions of the new law and all administrative actions are pertinent to it, to ensure that we are testing our drivers appropriately and that there are no slips in terms of the capacities required. Mr. Speaker, I got my driver's license 57 years ago. I'm not the same person then as I am now, and yet all I've ever been required to do was to pay money. My eyes haven't been tested. Whether I've fallen victim to some addiction that would impair my capacity has never been questioned. And I really refer the Minister to a study that was done during the tenure when his portfolio was held by former parliamentarian Pat Stevens many years ago, when the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the university, I think it was Dr. Pat Anderson, did a study that indicated that up to 1/3 of our public passenger drivers had never taken an honest driving test. They contribute to indiscipline and danger on the road. So in addition to the particular measures that I'm suggesting, and others will, in respect of today's critical situation, I'm asking that this longer range issue to do with driver capacity be considered. When you are summoned or charged for careless and dangerous driving, paying a money is not the correct solution at all. What you must do is to have enforced retraining at your expense. That is the appropriate penalty and restorative action. I suggest these to the consideration of the government.
Members, before you proceed, Mr. Fick, we've been going very, very nicely. Statement by Minister does not require a member to make a contribution to the Minister. You have a question to ask, except for the one that has been so designated. Mr. Robbins, you're speaking to me? Would you like to address me? Wait until I finish. I'll be very happy if you do that. Members, all I'm saying, let us follow the rules that you set and give to me to guide me. Let's not have a debate over a statement by the Minister when you are authorized by Parliament to ask a question. I have not stopped Mr. Trade because we'll have a little difficulty.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Mr. Fagan. Questions.
I saw on social media where the police buses were used they are using them to transport persons in this very difficult time. And I also understand that the Minister would have had words with the various taxi associations. I don't know if the Minister would want to tell us what instructions were given to the taximen or the associations, and if there's a particular route that the police buses are operating on. I'm particularly interested in persons who have to commute to the Portmore area. I know a large number of persons would be traveling from Portmore into the Kingston area. I don't know if the Minister would care to tell us if there's any particular arrangement that would have been made between these two entities, the associations and the police.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank my colleagues for their comments and questions. With regards to the Road Traffic Act, just as a means of providing some information, some aspects of the Act have been gazetted and are enforced, those that establish the Island Traffic Authority as the lead implementing agency. However, as some members are aware, some sections in the old Act, once it is recalled, taken off the books, all the sections would go, and for example, it would affect the Transport Authority Act. So we are moving now, as part of the process, to move the sections that relate to the Transport Authority, to be placed, to amend the Transport Authority Act, to place them. And the regulations are are being finalized. I know there was a retreat about 2 weeks ago, and they are on the final stretch to have those done. With regards to the driver's license, but Mr. Speaker, before I say that, I must say that although this process is long and people have been waiting, it is the normal legislative process that we have to pay attention to, so that we don't keep coming back here to amend what we have just passed. So the process is the process, and we are abiding and observing the process. And I seek persons' patience and understanding while we get it right. With regards to the driver's license, special attention is being paid to that very issue within the regulations. For example, the security features on the driver's license will be improved, because right now people are walking up and down with bogus driver's license, and it is hard to distinguish between the bogus and the real. For example, a gentleman turned up in Spanish Town with it and was asked for his driver's license. He produced a driver's license, 23 years old, and he produced a driver's license in the name of a very colorful senior superintendent of police, full name, and I wouldn't want to call the gentleman's name, at 23 years old. So that is being dealt with in the regulations. Also, some of the discussions speak to a periodic retesting, to speak to having the tests, a lot of the tests being digitalized, so that right now you go into an examination depot and you do the test. A clerk takes it, corrects it, and tells you if you pass or fail. You don't get a chance to see the document itself. And what we are moving to do is to digitize it, so that once you are on screen, online, as soon as you pass, it would be cut, and it would be centralized, so that no local person in a depot would be able to change the scores or interfere with it. That would be centrally dealt with. Driving schools are being checked right now as we speak by the Island Traffic Authority officers, so that they can be certified, because under the new act, all driving schools have to be certified. And then once you accumulate X amount of points, it is automatic that you have to go back to driver ed. Well, we are moving along with Hard Trust and the whole program to do a program to train a minimum of 100 drivers per parish in the first instances. But in the larger parishes, it will be more than 100 to begin to train for more and more persons using the certified driving schools. With regards to what routes, in the meetings with the taxi association persons and the consultations, they have just assured that their members are out working, and they have also said that they will be trying to deploy onto some routes to help to alleviate the situation. Routes close to where they work, the Transport Authority has also, for the time being, decided to cease operations for persons maybe running contrary to their routes, in order to assist in getting persons to be moved. But as to the specific routes where stakeholders have brought in vehicles, I really don't know them at this point in time.
Mr. Speaker, this is not a response to what the Minister has just said. It's a statement by Minister, prompted by a comment made by the member from Central Kingston. The fact of the matter is, at 12 o'clock, on or around 1 o'clock today, the leadership of the ministry, that is, the administrators and the teaching staff, indicated that they would like permission to send the children home for the rest of the day, because they were being bombarded by rumors and threats through social media, as was confirmed by the minister, about actions to be taken. Now, which responsible minister of education would sit by and subject children to exposure to danger in an atmosphere like this? We are coming from halfway tree down here was over an hour through the lips of the very opposition spokesman on transport. No traffic could move. So you are going to, what the member from Central Kingston is suggesting, that we should leave the children in school with no way of getting home in the normal way, exposing them to overcrowded areas where taxis are running in and out and around the place. No, it is an issue for me when it is suggested that that's exactly what the minister shouldn't have done. So understand me. I'm not ruling, I'm not commenting on the basis of what will satisfy you. I am talking about what is necessary under the circumstances. And as a person responsible for the affairs of, and the welfare of these children, I took that decision, and I don't ever intend to apologize for doing it. And if it occurred again, I will do it again and again and again.
Announcements. Order, please.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper number 67, Office of Utilities Regulation Annual Report for the year 2018-2019. Public Procurement Set-asides Order 2019, and the Public Procurement Set-asides Order 2019 Resolution under the Public Procurement Act. The Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019, and the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund, Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 Resolution under the Airports Economic Regulation Act. The Provisional Collection of Tax Minimum Business Tax Order 2019 and the Provisional Collection of Tax Minimum Business Tax Order 2019 Confirmation and Extension Resolution under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act. The First Supplementary Estimates for the financial year 2019-2020. The Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2019-2020 Interim Report. Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure Bodies First Supplementary 2019-2020.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker,
Minister.
I beg you to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the airport's economic regulation and expansion for Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 resolution. Mr. Speaker, whereas Section 4, subsection 3 of the Airports Economic Regulation Act, hereafter referred to as the Act, provides that where an airport is the subject of an economic regulation under the Act, the provisions of Section 24 of the Airports Authority Act shall not apply to that airport, and the Minister may authorize the Airports Authority to enter into arrangements for the airport or parts thereof to be operated by an approved airport operator on such terms and conditions as the Minister may approve. And whereas Section 4, subsection 6 provides that the Minister may, by order, designate a person to operate an airport or parts thereof as an approved airport operator for the purposes of this Act. And whereas PAC Kingston Airports Limited was designated the approved airport operator for the Norman Manley International Airport by the airport's designation Norman Manley International Airport Order 2019, and whereas with the authorization of the Minister, the Airports Authority entered into an arrangement on the 10th day of October 2018 for the Norman Manley International Airport to be operated by PAC Kingston Airport Limited on terms and conditions approved by the Minister. And whereas Section 21 1 of the Act, the Minister may make regulations generally for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of this Act. And whereas, under Section 21(1) of the Act, the Minister made the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion for Norman Manley International Airport Regulation 2019. And whereas Section 21(2) of the Act provides that the regulations be made under Section 21 shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas it is desirable that the Airports Economic Regulation Expansion Fund Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 be affirmed. And now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution be cited as the Airport Regulation 2019 resolution and the Airport Regulations 2019 be affirmed. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Dr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 resolution. The Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 resolution. Whereas by Section 60 subsection 1 of the Public Procurement Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make such regulations as he thinks fit to give full effect to the provisions of the Act, and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing. Regulations may prescribe provisions in relation to A. Procedures, standards, and criteria for the various methods and subject matter of procurement. B. The establishment, management, and operation of an electronic procurement system for the public sector. C. The bidding process and procedures. D. The provision of bid security, performance security, and any other security required in connection with procurement proceedings and the execution of procurement contracts. E. Special and differential treatment measures. F. The procedure for the reconsideration of the actions and decisions of procuring entities. G. The procedure for the review of the actions and decisions by the review board, including its powers to make interim or ancillary orders. H. Provisions in relation to fees. I. Forms including the standard forms of contracts, bidding documents, pre-qualification documents, and any other public procurement related documents developed by the office for use by procuring entities. And J. Any other thing required to be prescribed under the Act. And whereas on the 3rd day of July 2018, the Minister made the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 pursuant to paragraphs A, C, D, E, and J of Section 60 subsection 1 of the Act, and whereas it is provided by Section 60 subsection 2 of the Act that regulations made under paragraphs A, C, E, F, and G of Section 60 subsection 1 of the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 3rd day of July 2018, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 were affirmed by the Honourable House of Representatives, and whereas on the 13th day of July 2018, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018 were affirmed by the Honourable Senate, and whereas by virtue of Regulation 46 of the Public Procurement Regulations 2018, the Minister may, by order subject to affirmative resolution, specify any set-asides to be applied under the regulations, and the order shall include A. The description of the categories or types of Jamaican suppliers who are to benefit from the set-aside. B. The terms and conditions of the set-aside and the manner of its application to the Jamaican suppliers specified under paragraph A. And C. The matters that a Jamaican supplier needs to satisfy to demonstrate to a procuring entity that the Jamaican supplier is qualified to benefit from the set-aside. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as a Public Procurement Set-Aside Order 2019 resolution. 2. The Public Procurement Set-Asides Order 2019 is affirmed. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the first supplementary estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2020, and the Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2019-20 Interim Report, and the estimates of expenditure, public bodies, First Supplementary 2019-2020, which were laid on the table of the House on the 24th of September 2019, be referred to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee for consideration and report. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, at the end of 21 days, I beg to ask the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology the following question.
Copy that and give me 2 copies, please. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Samuda.
Oh. Just Carlos. Resolution.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I was a bit distracted, but why did we pass question and answer the question?
Because there was no response when the Speaker,
the Minister is here.
when the Speaker and made the announce and waited, there was no response from either side. We move on to the next item. Would you like to move that we
Please
go back?
recommit the questions and answers to questions, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favor? Those
And
against?
remember whose name the question is standing in. Please ask the Minister of National Security, who is ready and prepared to answer the questions.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Phillips.
I would ask through you to the Minister for the answers to question 21 standing in my name.
Dr. Chang.
Yeah, they have been circulated for some time. They were here from, you'll get them. Go ahead. You have the questions, right? Yeah, move up, please. Yeah. Yeah, the copy of the question, right? Thank you. Question 1. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister indicate whether the government of Jamaica has been considering a border control system based on the biometrics and analytics? Response: yes, the border management system will be upgraded and the new system to be acquired will be in keeping with international standards and best practices, as well as ensuring conformity to the requirements of Convention of International Civil Aviation 1944, which is binding on Jamaica. We recognize that in the wake of globalization, the movement of people and goods have tremendously increased over the last 2 decades. As a result of this, immigration and border management structures have had to adopt new systems to efficiently manage people flows across borders. As a consequence, countries are now confronted with the challenge of how to facilitate the movement of legitimate people while maintaining the security and integrity of their borders. The system will be procured by the government of Jamaica, will include biometric as well as risk management capabilities which will assist with threat assessment and evaluation of passengers. It is noteworthy that since 2010, the government of Jamaica has been expanding its use of technology in border management to include facial recognition technology. This is with the aim to eliminate cases of double identity and identity theft. The immigration laws currently allow for the capture of biometric information in the form of photograph and fingerprints as a means of identifying travelers. Globally, in an effort to mitigate the risks that may arise from cross-border travel, as well as bolster national security, an increasing number of countries are opting for and introducing e-passports and e-visas. In order to read these passports, biometric technology is required. The more information we have on potential passengers, the better able we will be in making decisions in the interest of national security. This will also bolster the ongoing thrust by the tourism sector towards increased visitor arrivals and generate tourism revenue without compromising the security of our borders, especially in light of changing nature of transnational crime and terrorism. The new border management system will serve to facilitate advanced security checks on travelers prior to arrival, as well as at the various ports of entry through the submission of advanced passenger information. Question 2. Will the Minister indicate whether such a system has been placed to tender, and if yes, can the Minister indicate how many companies have indicated an interest and their names, and what is the current status of these? Answer: no, the system has not yet gone to tender. The Passport Immigration and Citizenship Agency is currently in the design and development stage of the new system. A consultant was engaged and an inception report has been completed. A specification document will be developed and will form the basis for the tender, the RFP. Question 3, if the answer to 2 is negative, will the Minister indicate whether any company or companies have made representation to the Government of Jamaica regarding such a system? What is the name of the company or companies? Companies have made representation to the Ministry of National Security as well as to the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency. However, they have been advised that PICA is currently going through the procurement process, and when a tender is issued, they may submit their bid. One such company is called Secure Report, based in the United States of America, and they have the approval of the State Department. Other companies which we'll explore are other companies that we are aware of, which will explore the Kenyan Banknote Limited, with which we have some relationship, which PICA currently engaged in a number of their systems, including the passport system and the International Organization for Migration, IOM.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of follow-up questions. Would the Minister be in a position to indicate when it may be that tenders would go out? I believe that we are under some obligation in terms of our UN commitments to put in place such a immigration control system using modern biometrics. Could you indicate, if you do have it, any rough estimates as to the cost of such a system? And third, my information is that the company Secure Report, which did make a proposal, was considered that there were other interests that had been considered by the government of Jamaica, including Israeli-based interests. Can the Minister indicate if this is so?
I expect the tender to go out by the end of this financial year, the last quarter of this financial year. Certainly, if there's any delays in the system, I'll keep you informed, because there's urgency in getting this in place, not only to fulfill our international obligations, but it will increase the efficiency of the border security system, both from a security point of view and from the increasing number of visitors we have coming in on the tourism side. I would not wish to mislead you. I don't have an exact cost, but I will take that and get it to you by next sitting of the House. On the other side, no, we have not considered any other company. The proposal from Secure Report was what we consider an unsolicited approach. We know they made approach elsewhere in the Caribbean. I think in one of our sister Caribbean islands where another company superseded them. In this area, I said the government has a long-standing, well, I don't say relationship, but the Canadian banknote company have a strong footprint in Jamaica and has done work of this nature with Jamaica, and that's the only relationship we have at this point in time. Any comment?
Is the minister aware of the expressed dissatisfaction of Secure Report, who indicated concerns, at least who have expressed concerns, that some of their proprietary data may have been shared with others?
Well, I'm not aware of any proprietary data that we got from them. I met them informally, and I know there are discussions, but very early on we indicated that we would like to go to tender with this particular system, and in fact they came late last year, and earlier this year we acquired a consultant. I said to that totally unsolicited proposal. We did some checks on the background. They seemed to be an established company. It was a little bit surprising when they came in. I said most of the work we have done to date in this year has been with the Canadian Banknote Agency. Nobody else. But I've heard of some, informally, of some concerns, but I'm not aware of any proprietary material that was given to us, or I had no access to any. But they certainly can do the tender. They have been here, and I think they are among the limited number of companies that have the capacity to do so, and it will be, as I said, tendered accordingly very soon.
That was my next and last question. You expect to use a selected tender process, one, and two, in going to tender, and two, is the GOJ considering utilizing any technical expertise to advise the government of Jamaica in this matter?
Out of the report that will come from the consultancy, we'll examine it. I'm certain that PICA may seek technical assistance. At this point, I couldn't say if there's a proposal for a selective tender. Given the number of companies that are involved in this area, I suspect there will be more open tender internationally, because not many companies involved, and you'd want to allow them to enter. It has security implications, so only companies that are involved in security operations would be allowed to participate, or would be have the required qualities to participate. I think there's total of North America, and there's the Canadian banknote. That's the three I'm aware of, and I'd expect international tender would be the best process to go by. But we'll have to ensure that the technical specifications are met, but that will be the critical component in there, and that they have the security clearance to access the data that is required.
Where I ask, because it's like with the advanced passenger information systems, it's not only technically sophisticated, but there becomes an issue of control of data and the privacy of data of Jamaican citizens or those traveling through Jamaica, which arises. And in that context, we, people of Jamaica, government of Jamaica, would have an interest in ensuring that any such databases are not only secure, but that those who have access are in fact legitimate persons, both in terms of their bona fides, their integrity, and that the data of Jamaican citizens is not going to be used by either country interests, national interests, for purposes other than the purposes determined by a Jamaican government.
No. We are as concerned, member, because this is a critical area, from a security point of view. It's also true with, well, we currently have in the House the Data Protection Bill, which will bring the framework for providing a legal framework for protecting Jamaican data. And that will be, anything we do will have to be subject to the requirements of the bill. Certainly too in relation to our international partners, we'll have similar conditions, and it will be brought here. It's something that has critical importance, and we'll keep you informed.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I will now ask the Honourable Minister, Dr. Horace Chang, to answer the question standing in my name, question 19.
All right. Question standing in the name of the member from Manchester. Could the Honourable Minister give an update on the status of the marine base which we have slated to be established in Alligator Pond, South Manchester? No work has started on the marine base for Alligator Pond. What is the time frame for establishing the marine base in Alligator Pond? It is difficult to propose a time frame for the Alligator Pond base until a suitable site or location is identified. There are some serious challenges with the geotechnical problems there at this point in time. Could the Honourable Minister also state the operational capacity and the effectiveness of other marine bases across the island? There are 12 other marine bases that form a crucial part of our maritime surveillance and defence system capabilities, to include ongoing 24-hour land and sea patrol by members of the security forces. These bases are located along our coastline in the following 10 parishes: Kingston, Newport East, St. Thomas, Bowden, Portland, Port Antonio, St. Mary, Arcabesso, St. Anne, Ocherius, Trelawney, Falmouth, St. James, Freeport, Westmoreland, Nigel, Bluefields, St. Elizabeth, Black River, and St. Catherine, Old Harbour, and Portmore. These marine bases are currently operating at optimal operational capability and play a critical role in the following border security operation activities: search and rescue, surveillance and coastline territorial waters, environmental and wildlife protection, enforcement of maritime laws such as fishing industry, wildlife protection, beach control, Jamaica Tourist Board, water, sport regulation, Maritime Area Act and Exclusive Economic Zone Act, enforcement of counter-narcotics and firearm legislation, cooperation with other state agencies such as NEPA and the Fisheries Division. With so many porous borders along our coast in Jamaica, what plans are there to tighten up on these open spaces? I think there are 145 points of, illegal ports. Parliament is reminded that in 2017-18 financial year, the government invested close to $5 billion Jamaican dollars in border security initiative to enhance the monitoring of our coastline. These funds were used to upgrade a fleet of helicopters and airplanes for the Jamaica Defence Force and acquired 2 ships for the JDF Coast Guard. And these are ocean-going patrol vessels as opposed to near-shore patrol vessels. During the 2018-2019 financial year, the government also put in place the necessary resources to facilitate the implementation of a national coastal radar system that is currently being installed, which has enabled more effective monitoring of the entire coastline. These significant investment in retooling the security forces, as well as enhancing our coastal surveillance capacity, underscore our commitment to security and protection of the Jamaica borders. Our obligation under several international agreements have also strengthened our capability in adequately protecting our marine space and have ensured that our response capabilities are consistent with international standards. Parliament will also recall that during the 2019-2020 sectoral debate, the government highlighted the monitoring and control of our airspace and maritime domain as critical areas of continued focus in order to ensure the protection of our maritime space from illicit arms flow, as well as our blue economy as a small island developing state. Consequently, steps have been taken to ensure that the new Maritime, Air and Cyber Command Brigade is appropriately equipped. The requisite resources have been provided to facilitate the procurement of maritime patrol aircraft, and the construction of an integrated hangar in order to strengthen the Jamaica Defence Force capability in securing Jamaica's maritime zones. The Jamaica Defence Force has also acquired additional helicopters to enhance its current fleet, which is critical to search and rescue and maritime interception on the high seas, and of particular help in disaster relief operations.
Thank you, Minister. But may I ask, following up, Minister, I noticed that the two critical parishes, Clarendon and Manchester, have been omitted, and those affect our South Coast. Is there any active search taking place in Alligator Pond for the land acquisition?
Yes, we are still looking for lands in that area and out in Clarendon. We have acquired some land in Clarendon at Rocky Point, and the process of transferring the land is now ongoing, is in train. But the effective patrol have been significantly increased because of the development of the Maritime Air and Cyber Command, the Jamaica Defence Force. So we have had significantly increased interception by the Jamaica Defence Force because you are now able to use the aircraft to monitor the seas where we couldn't before, and the ocean-going vessels to intercept. The police still provides important element in the not only in terms of the beach control and other local legal requirements, but the ocean patrol vehicles can direct them to intercept them on shore, because that's where the challenge comes, is where they're going to land on shore. We need near-shore activities. So that area is being strengthened as well, and the police maritime bases are important to all of that. Also bear in mind that when the ocean-going patrol vessels of the JDF come near to shore, they cease to be the police of the sea. They have to hand over to the police at some point. So we are pursuing actively in both parishes. As I said, we have identified land in Rocky Point, and that should construction, well, certain designs should be finished by the end of this financial year, and construction starts soon. We are still looking in the Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth area and Manchester for an appropriate one. We'd like somewhere between Savannah and Clarendon, and we have looked at a number of space there.
Is there another set of questions that are to be answered?
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the question standing in my name at number 18 be answered.
Minister.
I'll label them for me now. 15. Okay. Okay. That's a Shiprider. Yeah, I circulate the answer. I just want to make sure it's 18 I'm giving it. Questions by member from South St. Catherine. What is the normal or average time taken to consider and make decisions on requests for waiver under the Shiprider agreement with the United States of America? On average, it takes approximately 18 days inclusive of weekends from the date of the request to the government of Jamaica via a diplomatic note to waive jurisdiction to the time when the Minister of National Security provides his decision to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. What are the factors taken into consideration for the granting of requests for such waivers? Pursuant to Section 20, Section 20, that's 5 of the Maritime Drug Trafficking Suppression Act, which is called the Shiprider Act, in relation to a person found on board of the vessel who is a Jamaican national, the Minister is required to do the following. A, the Minister must first obtain the advice in writing from the Attorney General. The Minister shall not waive Jamaica's right to exercise jurisdiction and authorize the relevant treaty state to enforce its laws against the person if the Attorney General advised that the Minister that 1, the relevant treaty state is not like to give effect to the right of that person not to be denied a fair trial. It is likely that the relevant treaty state will not give effect to the right of that person not to be punished, detained, or restricted to his personal liberty by reason of his race, place of origin, social class, color, religion, or political opinion. 3. The waiver and authorization would contravene the provision of the Constitution or law in relation to the person, or there is no impediment, whether law, evidence, or otherwise, to the effective prosecution of the person if he were to stand trial in Jamaica. It must be determined whether the offense in respect of which the relevant treaty state is seeking to enforce its laws against a person is an offense not punishable with death in Jamaica, but which is punishable with death under the law of the treaty relevant to state. If this is the case, then the minister shall not waive Jamaica's right to exercise jurisdiction or authorize the relevant treaty state to enforce its laws against the person unless the relevant treaty state gives such assurances as the minister considers sufficient that the death penalty will not be carried out. Having received an opinion from the Attorney General as it relates to the matters set out, having noted his limitations set out in B above, the minister is required to consider the following when seeking to determine whether or not to waive Jamaica's right to exercise jurisdiction and to authorize the relevant treaty state to enforce its laws against the person. It is in the interest of security, defense, international relations, or other essential public interests of Jamaica. And 2, in the interest of justice. How long did it take to grant requests for a waiver from the U.S. authorities in respect of the fishermen in around September 2017? The Ministry's records indicate that the case related to a context in which 5 men, namely Patrick Wayne Ferguson, Luther Fian Patterson, Gary George Thompson, Robert Weir, and David Roderick Williams, who were on a go-fast vessel named Josset WH478 that was intercepted by the United States Coast Guard in September 2017, were detained on suspicion of being in possession of and transporting illicit drugs based on the observation of packages being jettisoned from the vessel into the sea during a 45-minute chase. That interception process was undertaken in pursuance of the agreement between the government of the United States of America and Jamaica concerning cooperation in suppressing illicit maritime drug trafficking, otherwise known as the Shiprider Agreement. From the date of the request to the government of Jamaica via diplomatic note to waive jurisdiction to the date when the Minister of National Security provided his advice to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, which included the Ministry conducting its due diligence checks and obtained the opinion from the Attorney General's office chambers, it amounted to 19 days.
Minister, in light of the fact that permission was granted to board the vessel containing Jamaican citizens, what steps are usually taken to ensure that the provisions mentioned earlier at item number 2 are in fact adhered to, which is providing medical attention, providing consular service, and having the detained Jamaicans access legal representation?
We operate on the basis of information that is conveyed to us from the vessel of the operating state. And on the internet, we accept their word as given. There is very little we can do physically, as usually interception takes place, as said, somewhere east of Jamaica, and then we keep it through the Jamaica Defense Force and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
So there is no effort made on the part of the Jamaican government to ensure that
we seek information. We make requests for the information as required.
In the instant case, Minister, there are months have passed since the Jamaicans were detained, and given that we have a principle of presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
Well, as the treaty indicates, it's operated with a partner which has a legal system to respect. The men are allowed to have access to the consular service there through which they are required. The reality in the case of interdiction of drugs, many of the persons involved do not wish to have any contact with the consular services. That has been the traditional established fact over time.
Minister, as you know, as I said, there's a presumption of innocence. Whether they are guilty of the allegation is something to be determined by the appropriate tribunal. No, the average Jamaican is not aware of these provisions for which you made mention of. Access to consular service, access to medical services, legal representation. In light of the fact that these Jamaicans would be in a foreign jurisdiction, and it is that the Jamaican government would have given permission for the persons to be detained, isn't it reasonable to ensure that these provisions on the bilateral agreement, on the treaty agreement, are in fact adhered to by the partner with whom the permission is granted?
If you have reason to believe they're not being adhered to, because it's part of the agreement that they're allowed to get access to consular services, they will provide with legal services, then we intervene. But we had no indication that there is such denial of access. And as I said, in the case of illicit trading, in the case of individuals who are involved in the illicit trading of drugs, many of the persons are not interested in having connection with the consular services. When one is involved in something as dangerous as drugs for going straight, it's not the kind of thing you want to get the officials involved in until they're ready to go. That's just the reality of life, because it has other implications, but not only for it can have personal implications for the person's safety. So it's not something you take very lightly. Once they have access, the consular service up there are always available to all incarcerated Jamaicans, and from time to time they make contact and visit. But it's not something you do once they are established. In trial up there, you await their own effort to make any complaints they have.
Minister, I want to make it abundantly clear. The joint agreement that Jamaica would have entered into by the United States or any jurisdiction is towards protecting Jamaica's interests also against illicit trade in illicit goods, firearms, etc. But just the same way that a Jamaican would have been held in Jamaica for any alleged such act would be required by our laws to provide those very services. Why aren't we ensured that having granted that authority,
the men were provided with legals,
having granted that power, that in fact, just the same way that we as a government would have to adhere to the provision of those legal rights, legal representation, medical services, etc., that it will be incumbent on us to ensure that those are in fact being provided on a timely basis.
As it's based on that treaty agreement, we have had no complaints about or the clients having inaccessibility to any of the services we're alluded to. Is the part that have a similar jurisprudence as ours. In the case referred to, when the men came to the consulate later on, 10 months later, when they were seeking their visa to come home, they had no complaints. They were very comfortable. They normally meet, they just beside the consular of services, the superintendent of police is there, usually have discussion with them. And there was absolutely no complaint from the relevant person until some 18 months later when that case was filed by the ACLU. We had
Mr. Speaker, for my...
Mr. Goley.
Yes. Minister, your answers point out that the process of granting a waiver is a discretionary one, and before it can be exercised, there are various safeguards procedurally built into the law, ensuring that an opinion is granted by the Attorney General as to certain salient issues. And even after that, the minister has to satisfy himself whether or not it is in the interest of justice for Jamaica to waive its jurisdiction over its nationals. My question to you is, in light of what is reported to have taken place in the case of these fishermen, where they were detained on board a vessel in circumstances where they were exposed to the elements for a protracted period of time, many days before they eventually were taken into a port and presumably then housed in more satisfactory conditions. And in light of the fact that the constitutionality of the waiver is part of what the Attorney General must opine on, and our Constitution provides certain safeguards in the normal course of things, where persons who are detained have certain rights, including a right to bail, or at least the adjudication of whether or not they should be released on bail. Going forward, what will the government do to ensure that before we waive jurisdiction over our nationals, we extract certain undertakings from the requesting state to ensure that the rights of our citizens to be kept in humane conditions, to be brought before the court in the jurisdiction where they are being, where jurisdiction is being waived to, within the time frame that our law would regard as being constitutionally required, and so on. What procedure and undertakings are we going to now extract from the requesting state to protect our nationals from the kind of abuse that the media reports indicate took place in relation to these fishermen, with a protracted detention of them on board a vessel, exposed to the elements, and so on?
But, Member, I'm satisfied you have said that. I'm glad you have said media reports, because the ministry did seek in the early stages to get confirmed information that they had access to medical attention, which was confirmed during the course of the time they were at sea. We have not been able to confirm the media reports at this point in time. So we have had prolonged discussion between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the relevant state agencies to look at the protocol to ensure that there can be greater clarity in what happens while they are detained. Given at the time that it happened, there's a number of events that was on. It was a time they had a hurricane in the Caribbean, and they had to be moved from boats to boat, because once it's an established fact, once they are the boat that intercepts them is not necessarily the boat that takes them back to shore, and they are moved from one boat to the other. That's not an unusual event. The conditions on all the boats have been established to be more than what was stated in the media. But as I said, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have had significant discussion, long discussion on how to ensure that appropriate protocol is maintained in the future. Bear in mind, this matter was brought, which was signed off in 2015 at a time when the gun for drugs trade was at a height, and I think the intention then was generally to focus on intercepting the individuals out there. Right. Many of these amendments were put in place of a significant debate in the Senate, which you are well aware of. Right.
Minister, I would just suggest that in light of the reports and the litigation that is ensuing in relation to this matter, that the government look long and hard at the process and ensure that before we waive jurisdiction over our nationals to any other requesting state, that assurances are given that they will be taken to the jurisdiction which has sought the waiver within a short time frame, and they can't just be kept on board vessels going around the Caribbean for protracted periods. They must be taken to the jurisdiction which has sought the waiver and brought before the court there, so that they can make whatever applications they choose to do so in relation to their rights and their liberty. This situation, I think, has heightened that when we waive our jurisdiction over our nationals, we can't just do so on the assumption that they will be treated as we think our citizens should be treated. And we must extract undertakings from the requesting state as a condition of granting such waivers in the future in light of the experience of these fishermen. And it doesn't matter who the requesting state may be.
No. Remember, it's an issue we have to agree on, but the government has will take the step. In fact, we will you certainly agree on it that the amendments to protect the rights of the Jamaicans after apprehension was introduced by members on this side today. That's a historical fact, and that can be contentious, and the member is fully aware. The original bill agreement as drafted, as just said, send those who are intercepted in the high seas to the jurisdiction to be tried. That was because we did not have the capacity to do much intercepting ourselves. So that is the fact of life, and the then Senate members pointed it out, and it was supported by members from the government side, and made significant changes to bring about the issue you're referring to. So this government is very cognizant of that, and will take necessary steps to ensure that the conditions are reasonable under which they meet our constitutional standards. Clearly, we'll monitor the case there, because to see what emerges in the court based on what is happening. I'm not convinced that all of what is out in the media is correct. In fact, I'm sure that all that's in the media is not correct. And therefore, we'll monitor the courts to see what emerges, but certainly the conditions that our Jamaicans must be maintained under when jurisdiction is waived will be monitored. I said that at the time it happened, it was a peculiar time. Not many intercept is done during the time when there's a hurricane going on in the Caribbean region. And that was the reality of the time. And therefore, the time they were at sea was beyond the normal length of time. But it will take about 14 to 18 days to ensure you can waive jurisdiction, because what happens, we have to ask the questions and have them confirmed after notice is sent to the Jamaica Defense Force, Jamaica Coast Guard, and then the diplomat comes through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Minister. I mean, one understands that diligence must be done before the waiver is granted. That's very important. And the process which is in the law, which was indeed deliberated in the Senate, and suggestions were made from both sides to come up with the safeguards that are built in there. That's not, the point is it's in the law now, but it's still a discretionary waiver. The government of Jamaica doesn't have to waive. The minister is not obliged to waive, and he can only waive if he's satisfied that the interests of justice so require it, and that the Constitution of Jamaica will not be violated by doing so. And in light of what has taken place, we're in a different paradigm when it comes to this matter, and I think the government really needs to be assiduous in ensuring that the necessary commitments and undertakings are given by the requesting state before we waive, so that the citizens' rights are not abused by whatever practicalities may seem to be necessary in taking one's time so as not to inconvenience the Navy or whatever it may be while they're at sea. That's not really the point. The point is, if we are waiving jurisdiction over our nationals, the requesting state must take them before a court in the territory where they are, from which the request is made, so that the necessary applications can be made right away within the time frames that our Constitution and our Bail Act require. That's the point.
AG to make a quick comment before I answer.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened to the comments made by the member, and he has rightly recalled that this matter was hotly debated in the Senate when the amendments were made by that side when it was in government to allow for the waiver of jurisdiction, to have Jamaican national right waived for trial locally. And I recall, Mr. Speaker, the amount of concerns that were expressed and the plea for caution. And it's just interesting that it appears as if certain positions are just opposite. It's almost like deja vu. It's really to the point where at the time when the amendment was being piloted, the matter was adjourned because so strongly we on this side, when we were on that side, felt about the need for certain precautions to be in place. I will say, Mr. Speaker, as Minister Chang has indicated, that we have taken a new look at it, and we should learn, because we should learn, so that a complete revision of the process, much of the work has already been done. And there is no getting around dealing with these matters with utmost caution. But you know, it's hard to sit and swallow certain things. Really hard. Because we must learn. When we are entrusted with the power, we are here to make decisions in the best interest of the people of Jamaica. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, if only we pause, particularly when we are in government, and this is what this side in government is doing, pausing and taking careful consideration of the matter. But I can say to all Jamaicans who are listening, Mr. Speaker, be assured that this government is not signing away the right of anyone. We're not signing away the right of anyone. These are challenging times. And we're mindful of the difficult context in which we cooperate with our international partners. And we will do all that we can to balance all the circumstances, but we're not signing away anybody's right. So Minister Chang has indicated that the work has begun in conjunction with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, his ministry, and the chambers.
Ms. Hanna.
You want to go ahead? Go on.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Attorney General for those comments. This is not an attempt to cast blame on any aspect of this other than to say, in light of the experience of how our nationals have been treated by other states, and in light of the fact that it is a discretionary power that the law grants with well-crafted safeguards, which you say you're reviewing and you're pausing. I mean, I don't know how long this pause is going to be. You've been in office close to 4 years. And to seek to say that the genesis of the problem is what took place when these amendments were made, I think is to miss the point. There is an opportunity whenever a request is made for a waiver to ensure that the requesting state gives assurances to protect the nationals in terms of treatment, expedition, etc. Now, given the experience that has come to light as to how our nationals have been treated, I have asked the Minister to consider ensuring that those protections through appropriate undertakings and so on are given. The Attorney General has waffled around the issue and said, oh, well, we're not going to throw away the rights of anyone. I want a specific assurance that the question of what conditions should be attached to a waiver or what undertaking should be extracted from the requesting state will be implemented going forward. There's no need for any pause to review the law. That can be ongoing. But we need to ensure that the rights of our citizens are protected now. And I want that assurance to be given.
Member, as I said, I hope would not be contentious issue, but quite frankly, member from South India should be a little bit more less exuberant in this criticism. Because you're then the minister, member, and you brought to the House and you're concerned with some of the concerns you had. The bill as brought had none of the safeguards in there. Agreed, it was a mutual agreement to put in those safeguards. But that bill as drafted and brought to the House by you then as minister had none of the safeguards in there. In fact, your principal concern was expressed in what is here, a fact that is exacerbated by the frequent adjournment of our criminal justice system because they were not tried properly in Jamaica. That is what you're saying about our justice system. The general rule has been in the practice that no local prosecution is successfully maintained against people apprehended at sea with drugs. That is what was said by your minister then. Matters not beyond the point. The state of mind that you're saying send off Jamaicans so we'll get them prosecuted because we couldn't do it here. That's technically what they said. And I want the members here, that's what was being said. We could not prosecute them. So we send them off without any conditions to be locked up for 30 years, not 14 days. That is what is here. I'm quoting.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Speaker, the question asks.
And it was rammed down our throat.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
No, let me read the entire quotation for the members who are listening, because you're not listening. Accordingly, Mr. President, the general rule has been in practice that no local prosecution is successfully maintained where Jamaica asserts jurisdiction over its nationals who are held seaworthy of our territorial waters and vessels found with contraband. That was by the Minister of Justice in seeking to get approval by this bill. That's his quotation. And when they went to the United States, as said further by another senator, as example given was the set from St. Elizabeth, where there were 6 individuals, 3 Ghanaians, 3 Jamaicans. The 3 Ghanaians got 30 years, the 3 Jamaicans got off scot-free. That was the example given there, to show that we could not prosecute our nationals. We are doing the right thing.
Yes.
In what you have read, Minister, because when the External Affairs Committee actually met and the Ministry of National Security presented, what was in the report is that no contraband was found on the vessel.
Mr. Speaker, I think there are two distinct issues. There is no doubt, based on the information that we have in our possession, that there are concerns in respect of the case. And yes, the records reveal certain things.
On a point of order,
if
I can, because the records are also there when the Commodore spoke about it. And when the specific question was asked, if they saw the imaging of what the other jurisdiction was saying that was on the boat, the answer was no. They took the word of mouth of the other jurisdiction. In the report itself, what was clear is that the contraband that is allegedly found on the boat was found floating in the sea. And then the persons were taken into jurisdiction or into custody, and the boat was destroyed. That is what the report from the ministry actually says.
So, Minister may speak to the facts of the case. There are 2 separate issues that we have to deal with. One, in respect of the suggestions by the member about amendment and the approach to take. And we're really reminding that in the other place, the amendment, which is the subject matter of the controversy, the law in question, came about in a particular context. And I'm merely saying that we need to learn, and I don't think that anything differently is being said on that side. So there is the case itself and the circumstances of the case, but then there is also the issue of the law. And sometimes we must walk back and be reminded of how we do things. And to the extent that we agree that an approach was wrong, we must admit it, and we must endeavor to do differently. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Jackson, the question I pose to the Minister is regarding the fishermen detained and what the existing provisions are and whether they were adhered to. Now, regardless of whatever safeguard you have now or you enhance it with later on, if we don't take steps to make sure that those are adhered to, they amounts to nothing. So I really don't see the relevance of the pause and what to come. What exists now, were they adhered to or not? Minister, you know and many of us know that even in foreign jurisdictions, many persons there are denied what is provided for in the law. And my concern is, where we have a treaty arrangement with certain safeguards to protect the interests of Jamaicans who are presumed innocent until proven guilty, it is the obligation of the state to ensure that those rights are protected in those jurisdictions. In the instant case, there was an extended log time between any communication by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who acts on behalf of the government with the foreign party. Now, who is protecting Jamaica's interests? It could have been you, could have been anyone over there is detained in any foreign jurisdiction, and where you have legal provisions, it's our duty as a state, as a government, to ensure that those legal provisions are adhered to. And that's where my concern is, Minister.
As I indicated, member, the safeguards were checked. It was established through Minister of Foreign Affairs. They would have access to medical services. Indeed, all required here. What the gap in the communication happened after they were during the trial period, when as I indicated, is not an area that you follow up too closely, because members don't wish to have connection with the embassy at that point in time, in many cases, where illicit drug trading is concerned. What I could say is that, and examining what has happened, and I think this is why the member have elicited some strong response on this side, there are still gaps in the conditions to certify what is happening, and in the discussion that's proceeding between the Coast Guard and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other officials from the treaty party, we're ensuring that those gaps are closed. But we fulfilled what was required. Those things were not only it's part of the law, but was philosophically part of what this members of this government wanted put in the law to ensure that the Jamaican rights were protected and inquiries were followed. In the end, in terms of what happened at the court, we are just getting that information now. The reports we had, and the standard reporting that the containers of illicit drugs is removed from the boat when they are apprehended, where they are visible. It was part of the reason given for signing the treaty agreement, because under our common law, it's expected the entire sample of drug would be brought to court. In the case of the treaty partner, they take a sample on the jurisdiction, and that is really what happened, and why it was not there, I wouldn't be able to say at this point. We are certainly making inquiries through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but that was among the reasons why this agreement was brought, because it is impossible to bring the entire sample to Jamaica, and it's important to keep the boat to shore, because a small boat attached to another small boat is a major navigational risk, and they're usually destroyed after waiver is granted. That is how the operating process goes. And
finally, on my part, Mr. Speaker, and I want to preface it by reiterating the point I made earlier on. It is in Jamaica's interest for mutual cooperation to protect our borders and to prevent illicit contraband and arms from coming into Jamaica. With that said, Minister, in the instant case, can you assure this House that going forward, given the fact that the granting of the waiver is a discretion on the part of the Jamaican government, that steps will be taken by your ministry through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that interface with the foreign entities for periodic reports and confirmation that the provisions contained in the joint agreement are in fact adhered to?
Yes, we're doing it. That's what we're doing now in looking at reviewing the entire treaty to ensure that in future we'll have the kind of dialogue proceeding progressing. The treaty will provide for it, and we will abide by the treaty agreements, right? Because we have had at least one more case since then, and we're pushing it along those lines.
Mrs. Ford.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order in respect of Standing Order 80. Now, the particular case and related matters were thoroughly dealt with at last week's sitting of the Internal External Affairs Committee of the House. And as you are aware, Mr. Speaker, that the rules require a report from the committee to the whole House on these matters. And it is my understanding that all of the issues were dealt with in details, and all of the pertinent office holders who could be of assistance came before the committee and provided the information. So, in order to assist the whole House, and I gather the meeting was chaired by Member Golding, that particular meeting. If the information is incorrect, I stand corrected. The Internal External Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not
Member
on that
Jackson.
committee.
Very well.
Again,
very
the Attorney
well.
General's facts are wrong again.
No. Well, you told me. No, you said Golding. You said Golding. Anyway, but the point is that the committee sat. The issue was the primary issue of consideration Witnesses were summoned, they attended, reports were provided, and all pertinent information was put before the committee. And so, to the member who chaired the committee, we look forward to getting the report as the standing order require, or orders require.
Mr. Chang.
The rights are protected wherever they are, home or abroad. The next question, the Minister's sectoral presentation to the House on April 16, 2019, a number of projects to be undertaken during the 2019-2020 financial year was listed of these projects. What is the specific timeline for implementation and completion of each of the stated projects? The specific timeline for implementation, startup and completion of each stated project is outlined in Appendix 1 as circulated. Member, I don't know if you want me to go through all of that because a large number of repair projects. If you have any questions, then I will be free to answer the specific question. They are listed there in Appendix 1 from the chaplaincy to Mobile West, continuing to, I think there are some 60 total number of projects for capital investment is 9 listed on that page and the subsequent ones. What are the provisions for external monitoring and evaluation of the projects? The Auditor General's Department, Integrity Commission, and the Public Procurement Commission are the external bodies that provide oversight of projects undertaken by the Ministry. Notwithstanding, internally, the Ministry's major technology transformation branch, facilities maintenance and building projects branch, and the JCF property management and maintenance division also monitor the projects falling within their respective remits. The Ministry also has a capital expenditure monitoring committee that do further monitoring of the progress of the projects. What is the proposed expenditure for each project? The proposed expenditure for each project is outlined in Appendix 1. What is the intended procurement methodology for each project? The intended procurement methodology for each project also outlined in Appendix 1. In the said sectoral presentation, the Minister gave a number of police stations that are listed for repairs. Can the Minister state, of the 190 police stations, how many are deemed in need of repairs? 125 were deemed in need of significant repairs after a station-by-station audit, and the others that were not in need work had been done to them in the former financial year, prior financial year. What is the cost of each of the 60 repairs and renovations completed over the last 2 years? Over the last 2 financial years, 2017-18 and 2018-19, a combined 180 repairs and renovation projects were undertaken in respect of police stations. Of that number, 149 were minor repairs costing less than 5 million each to address issues requiring immediate attention and not the full scope of what was required due to available funding. At the same time, a total of 31 major renovation projects, see Appendix 2 and 3. The foregoing must be reviewed within the context that the stock of police facilities across the country have been in a state of disrepair due to limited investment for a considerable period of time. How many stations will be left to be repaired after not, I think there's an error in the question, 7 stated for this year. Of the 125 stations in need of major repairs and renovations, 60 stations are stated for repairs by the Ministry of National Security in the course of this year and not 7. Additionally, the National Housing Trust has partnered with the Ministry of National Security and has been allotted 12 stations for major work in areas where they are operating and building homes. Of that number, they are expected to complete 5 stations or police facilities during the financial year. This brings the total number of stations projected for completion during this financial year to 65. Therefore, a total of 60 will be left for major repairs for completion after completion of the 65 projected for this year. The Jamaica Social Investment Fund has partnered with the Ministry of National Security for the renovation of 8 stations. And again, these are listed in the table provided to the member. And the details of the partnership between Ministry of National Security and Jamaica Social Investment Fund and NHT are outlined. I think the current one being done in Bagua, maybe the member may be aware, as it's in St. Catherine, as well as current work being done in Olympic Way, and Franklin Town, I think, is pretty much near completed. 60 and not 7 were selected for 2019-20. A comprehensive assessment was conducted on all the police facilities. Based on the assessment, a police facility audit report was produced in April 2019, which was utilized to select the 60 stated for financial year 2019-2020. I'll be quite willing to provide the member with a copy of that audit done by an engineer. When is the work slated to begin on each location? Both new construction and rehabilitation. Appendix 4 provides an indication of when work will begin on each location. What are the provisions for external monitoring and quality evaluation audit? Again, the Auditor General Department, Integrity Commission, Public Procurement Commission are the external bodies that provide oversight of projects undertaken by the Ministry. Notwithstanding that, internally, the Ministry's Facilities Management and Building Projects Branch and the Jamaica Constable Force Property Management and Maintenance Division also monitor the projects falling within their respective remits. The Ministry has also established a capital expenditure monitoring committee that monitors the progress of the projects and seeks to get the expenditure not only in a matter of integrity but in a smooth manner and efficient manner over the financial year.
Thank you, Minister, for the information you have provided. As you know, Minister, the state of the police stations are critical to lifting the morale of the men and women who serve in the force and for them to provide security to the country. I'm a bit concerned, Minister, in a number in the appendix 4. There are a number of stations for which there's no estimated costs, but yet they are budgeted for. What's the basis of arriving at a budget without even an indicative estimate for these repairs to be done? Second question, Minister. There's a number of minor repairs to numerous stations across the country. What steps are taken to engage local tradesmen to be engaged in these repair works so that the local economy can benefit from these expenditures that are made? Quite often we hear that persons journey from Kingston to Stavlamar and other distant places to do minor repairs when you have skilled, capable tradesmen in many of these communities who can perform those repair work in keeping with what guidelines are established by the ministry for proper workmanship and accountability.
Estimates are done. I'm sorry they're not included in the answer. I should have looked at that myself because there's about each station has to get proper estimates done before the month funding is committed by the relevant Department Secretary and their team. In terms of small, there's a small jobs often are taken up by local, at least parish-based contractors, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, in repairing police stations, that has not proved to be the best route to go, because you go the route of, it really means what you're referring to are the registered grade 4 contractors and grade 3 contractors across the island, who all tend to be locally based and operate. The reality is that in going for small contractors, I encourage movement away from that as minister this year. I name contractors and say move to larger contractor and combine the work, because oftentimes the small contractors who tend, unfortunately, to be underfunded, and we need to provide access, as we have done the procurement process for small contractors, but they get police stations, they do not finish the work. In most cases, not one or two incidental. They have a challenge in doing the work on time because they all have to be paid both mobilization exactly on time when the work is finished. Now this is something that the government we have to take and correct, but I cannot afford for that to continue in police stations. We find one window left for 1 year to be finished. The person leave and the paint job is not done. Sometimes they use the wrong material. We have a couple of police stations where they use, instead of painting, they use some kind of gasoline material, and we cannot use the station. We have to go back, and one in fact in St. Elizabeth, Pedro, and one in Barrytown in St. James. And you have to leave it closed until we get additional funding to scrape off everything and redo the wall literally. And I've encouraged that in getting it done. I find moderate-sized contractors who are fully capitalized and can give me a job done on time, on budget, and quality work that we monitor. We have had challenges with the small contractors across the island. On many occasions, I've had to, I think I'm interviewing in 2 cases where we had emergency work, and I asked a major contractor to go and do this. And they could get it done quickly, quality work, because they have engineers working for them, and then they get their pay when required. So there is a challenge in dealing with the small works across the island with the small contractors which we are dealing with. What we are instituting on completion of the rehabilitation of all our police stations, and by the next financial year all of them will be in a different state in terms of rehabilitation. Some of the Spring Hill, I think, is more East Portland, West Portland. A number of them will be finished. Well, Trenchtown was recently done. You'll be aware of that, and is in good condition. So it was Almantown, which we're aware of. Is to institute in each of the police divisions a system called a facilities maintenance system, which is a modern way, again, technology used to improve efficiency, that when requests are made for repairs, even the most minor repair, it is on record, and that senior officers and the ministry can monitor what is happening. That way we can then ensure we get work, and even if it's a small contractor, then you can correct the problem early. But the current system is pretty inefficient and cumbersome, and it does not lend itself to too many small contractors. But we are fixing that. The facilities maintenance program will ensure, I said, much better monitoring about quality and timing and efficiency, and in terms of budgeting. And that should be in place by the end of the year.
Minister, in Appendix 1, number 7, for the 3rd quarter of 2019-2020, $800 million for motor vehicles. I presume you have a targeted amount of vehicles for the fiscal year. Does this expenditure envision that the motor vehicles, yes, does this expenditure envision that the motor vehicles, the used cars that are supposed to be supplied, will be provided for in this fiscal year? And if so, can you give us an update on where we are with those outstanding vehicles?
No, I think I see what you're getting at. I don't understand the way I structured the question. This $800 million have not to do with used cars.
I know.
Okay, well, you did that. I won't make that clear. No, this year is to bring new vehicles into the fleet. Yes, and the bulk of it was done on the basis of RFP, by the technical people from the police force, and advertised. The advertisement come in, I pushed hard, and they completed RFP by the end of May, but they were completed early in the budget year, because they were aware of the funding coming, and the evaluation has been done, and we should be getting the vehicles by November of this year. Right? Yeah. Right? I am aware all new vehicles that has gone out. Not all of the amount was reserved to acquire vehicles for on the normal basis necessary, which is emergency basis, because of the number of activities you have to buy a number of vehicles, maybe 10 or 12 off the shelf. But the bulk of the vehicles we should be getting in, and in fact the report on the evaluation of the tender should be available by, I expect, by next week, over the next fortnight.
Minister, for that tender, is that on the basis of a prescribed make of motor vehicles, or is it an open list?
Specifications, again, mechanical specification I give them, start with by the police force. So the vehicle may fall, if it's a pickup, requirements are given, so the specification could be whether it is any of the twin cab pickups that are available, if they meet could meet that. Among the requirements of this tender this year was a service contract for the first 2 years. And therefore the person involved had to demonstrate that they had the capacity to serve the vehicles and repair them at least across the island. So they have the required relationship with a number of the certified garages. But it had to give us verifiable information that it can provide service over the next 2 years. In addition to that, all vehicles that are coming will be fitted with the AMBER system, which will allow the police to monitor their vehicles very effectively across the island and to check that the maintenance is being done.
Minister, on item 8, the Jamaica Eye Phase 2, just to verify that the information here is as intended, $530 billion
of Jamaica Eye? No, I think billion would be wrong. It's billions. Direct contract exclusion costs, 530 million. That's a typo error. In terms of the used cars, the pickups were delivered. All 19 pickups were delivered, and then the process of clearing the remaining cars, which I think is 19 pickups, which concludes what was required in the first phase of purchase. I don't recall how many have been delivered, but there are still 50 vehicles motor vehicle cars to come, and the process of removing them from the wharf is currently ongoing.
Mr. Minister, 50 now has been delivered, and 19 has been pickups, all that was supposed to be supplied, and 50 cars. Minister, you know, the member from Central, from Western Westmoreland, chairman of the PAAC, will tell you that at meetings of the PAC, we were told over a year ago that some vehicles were on the wharf, being cleared. The words used then, as we speak, the vehicles are being cleared. No, I hear that 15 vehicles are on the wharf being cleared. Can you assure us, Minister, that a year and a half won't pass for these 50 vehicles being cleared will not take that long?
I think on this occasion I can give the assurance. In fact, I can hold somebody accountable if they are not done, and I will certainly do so. Right? But the 19 pickups were delivered and are off the wharf and at TMR, and are being cleaned up. So the cars will follow pretty quickly.
Minister, just on that issue, the original cost for that set of vehicle, we were told at one stage, I think either in the House or at a PAC meeting, that there was an agreement, there was a negotiation taking place for a settlement with the provider of the vehicles, but that there was a request for an additional amount by the contractor for the vehicles. Was that paid over to no
additional money?
No additional money.
No,
so the cost,
not a dollar more.
Sorry?
Not a dollar more is paid over the contract.
All right, and for the demurrage cost and all of that.
Yeah, right.
The demurrage costs for the times that the vehicles have been on the wharf, was that absorbed by the supplier or the ministry itself?
The wharf was just waived by all the wharf operators who were involved at the end of it. So it didn't cost any more. No additional cost.
Minister, on the question of Jamaica Eye, are there any cameras purchased by the ministry that have not been installed and still in storage?
Jamaica Eye cameras are being installed now. I think most of them should be finished by this week, and are being tested, because the information I have is that would be fully online with all cameras the end of this month. So I expect them being tested now. And I checked that last week. The contracts were awarded at the beginning of the month, and they're out replacing and installing cameras. They're replacing those of the old set, but were not properly that were not working, and they're putting some additional new ones. But 500 cameras are acquired and they're being installed. And the backbone of the system, which is the interconnectivity between the main towns, was complete. And I expect, as I said, that the deadline I've been given will be fulfilled, and I'll inform in the morning.
Minister, I particularly, this is for the 530 million, you corrected, is for 2019-2020. I meant to ask, the cameras I made reference to was 2018, 2019, or prior. Information I have is that cameras were purchased. The specs on it was not appropriate and so not installed. Can you verify that to be so or not, Minister?
I cannot verify that, member, and if it is so, I will check and certainly inform you, because we need the cameras.
Lastly, on the question of the cameras with the Jamaica Eye, which, by the way, I must tell you, Minister, and I told your predecessor, is a program that I fully support. My question to you, given the challenge we face with crime and murders in identified towns, areas across the country, is the deployment of these cameras based on those high crime areas where the cameras can serve to mitigate the incidents of murders and shootings across the country? For example, in St. James, right, where we have state of emergency for over a year, is it that areas like those are being given priority, both for providing the backbone for which you made mention of and the subsequent deployment of the cameras?
Yeah, member, thank you for your reference to it and your support on the topic. It's a very important part of the improving the capacity of the police force. And obviously high crime areas are in fact the areas we go to primarily, and then we're going to build out from there. So St. James cameras were being installed. In fact, sadly and coincidentally, the cameras where that major killing of a businessman took place were among the 5 cameras around Samson Square not working. 3 of them were not working at the time. We got footage from other cameras, but they, of course, and can be used, thankfully, although the private cameras are not always as satisfactory as the cameras we acquire. But those cameras are being changed as I speak to you, and St. James, I know they're being changed on. So St. James, Maypen, Spanish Town, section of the corporate area, Negril, Mandeville, I'm not sure Mandeville, and Otrus were on the list of early priorities. Now what we're seeking to do in expanding, we're looking at the number of the small towns that have come under heavy pressure recently, because it will not take much cameras to do so. In fact, in those towns, some of the business people are willing to contribute. You're looking at somewhere like a Junction, maybe 10 cameras can cover all of Junction, and therefore give you, and as my friend here said, Gail will take 6 cameras. If the right cameras are installed, right, we can't catch those, see? And we are pursuing that course quite aggressively, and we expect now that the backbone is built out and the core is active, we can add to that quite active. What I publicly appeal, I make a public appeal to the business community and residential communities who want to get in with Jamaica Eye to get in contact with the ministry, and we ensure that the technical professionals who are involved will advise them on the specifications for the cameras, because not all cameras will give you evidentiary material, and it is critical, and also how to install them, because once you move away from the public space, there's the question of privacy, especially if we get to like a townhouse complex and so forth. So we are available. I think it will bring significant benefit and will certainly enhance the police capacity to deal with criminal activity throughout our urban centers over time. We are pursuing the installation actively, and we ensure that it will be functional and come out of this financial year in good order.
House Leader.
Public business. Mr. Montague.
Mr. Speaker, I move now for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I had given earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Montague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a brief on the resolutions and to bring some more clarity to the House. The Airports Authority of Jamaica, a statutory corporation, is responsible for the long-term planning, oversight, operation, and development of prescribed airports in Jamaica and advises the government of Jamaica on air transport policy issues. The AAJ operates within the broader context of the government of Jamaica's transport policy, which is itself a subset of the overall economic policy. The government of Jamaica has chosen the mechanism of a public-private partnership to achieve the required level of capital expenditure and development for the airport sector. To that end, Mr. Speaker, the Sangster International Airport was privatized in 2003. The Norman Manley International Airport is currently in the PPP transition process. The current process for the privatization of the airport began in March 2017 when a request for qualification of bidders along with an information memorandum was issued. Following the pre-qualification and bidding process, Grupo Aeroporte del Pacifico GAP emerged as the preferred bidder in September 2018, and on October 10, 2018, the AAJ entered into a concession agreement with PAC Kingston Airport Limited, PACAL, a special purpose vehicle registered by GAP in Jamaica for the management and operation of the airport. Cabinet, by way of decision number 1718 dated May 14, 2018, gave approval for the issuance of the final concession agreement for the management and operation of the airport. When the government of Jamaica embarked upon the privatization of the major international airports in and around 2003, a legislative framework was created by the passage into law of the Airports Economic Regulation Act and several regulations and subsidiary legislation promulgated thereunder. At that time, the Sangster International Airport was privatized and the government of Jamaica created a commercial entity to operate the Norman Manley International Airport. That company, the Norman Manley, the NMIA Airports Limited, is wholly owned subsidiary of the AAG. In order for PACAL to assume the operations and management of the airport in keeping with the terms and conditions stipulated in the concession agreement, that private entity must be legally authorized to do so, and this requires the repeal of existing regulations and orders, as well as the promulgation of new orders and notices. The agreement between the parties provides for a period of 12 months for the satisfaction of the conditions precedent, which must be met or waived prior to PACAL being able to take over the operations. The new regulations entitled the Airport Economic Regulation Expansion for Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 will grant PACAL the legal right to collect the AIF from passengers departing from the airport on behalf of the government of Jamaica for the aforementioned purposes. For the avoidance of doubt, PACAL's only role in relation to the AIF will be to collect same and deposit into the government of Jamaica's expansion account for the use by the AAJ. The Airport Economic Regulation Expansion for Norman Manley International Airport Regulations 2019 and the Airport's Economic Regulation Expansion for Norman Manley Airport Regulations 2019 resolution have been prepared by the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel pursuant to Section 21 of the Airports Act and are being now laid before this Honourable House for affirmative resolution. Mr. Speaker, if it so pleases you. Mr. Speaker, can you move the motion? Those in favor?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As have it. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for a suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion related to the table of the supplementary estimates, the notice of which I gave earlier. No, my, Mr. Speaker, as is required by the Jamaica's fiscal rules, which are embedded in the amendments to the Fiscal Administration and Audit Act, the Government of Jamaica, prior to September 30th of each year, is required to table an update to the Fiscal Policy Paper, originally tabled in April, and that is the Interim Fiscal Policy Paper, and use it as an opportunity to also table at the same time the supplementary estimates for the rest of the financial year. And Mr. Speaker, the motion speaks to referring these documents, the first supplementary estimates and the estimates of revenue and expenditure and the interim fiscal policy paper, to the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee for consideration and report. And I hope that finds favor with the House.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As have it.
I rise to very briefly deal with three provisional collection of tax orders that were laid on the table of the House last week. And Mr. Speaker, we know that under our system, when the new taxes or new tax measures are introduced in the budget debate, they are usually implemented promptly, and they're implemented promptly by way of provisional tax orders while the permanent legislation is being put in place. That is the case here as well, Mr. Speaker, and with respect to some of the measures in the last budget, the stamp duty, transfer tax, and the minimum business tax, that permanent legislation is in progress, but until it has been laid in the House and debated and passed, we have to extend the provisional collection of tax. So I rise, Mr. Speaker, first of all to introduce the provisional collection of tax stamp duty order 2019, confirmation and enforced resolution 2019. This Honourable House will recall that as a part of the 2019-20 revenue measures, I had announced a substitution of all ad valorem rates in the Stamp Duty Act to be substituted with a specific flat rate of $100 per document or parcel to transactions with value less than $500,000, and a flat rate of $5,000 per document or parcel for transactions valued at $500,000 or more. These measures, Mr. Speaker, are expected to stimulate greater business and economic activity, particularly in relation, and to augment economic growth. And the removal of these ad valorem rates would not only increase certainty in the market, but also further reform of the tax system to remove the most distortionary taxes that distort economic activity and reducing the cost of micro and small businesses, thereby encouraging increased risk-taking and business activity. Mr. Speaker, the measures were implemented by means of the Provisional Collection of Tax Act, and the provisional orders have a shelf life of 6 months, but may be extended by a further 3 months by resolution of this House. This Act requires orders made under the delegated powers of the Minister of Finance to be confirmed by resolution within the next 30 days on which the House sits after the date of publication in the Gazette. The order was confirmed on the 31st of July 2019, and as such would ordinarily lapse on the September 30th of 2019. However, Mr. Speaker, it is noted that the reform of the Stamp Duty Act is substantial and requires extensive consultation. These consultations are ongoing, and As such, the leave of the House is sought to extend the shelf life of the provisional order to facilitate the conclusion of these consultations so that the reform may be as comprehensive as possible. The measures have been successfully implemented by Tax Administration Jamaica, and so, Mr. Speaker, we intend to have the permanent legislation in respect of these matters tabled in this House in the shortest possible time to ensure compliance with the Act. However, Mr. Speaker, as Tax Administration is in need of additional time contemplated by the legislation to ensure that all relevant matters can be resolved, I commend the Provisional Collection of Tax Stamp Duty Order to the House for its continuation in force via the resolution. Have to one by one. Mr. Speaker, I crave the indulgence of the House just to take all three of them together rather than debate each one of them separately. So, Mr. Speaker, I continue with the Provisional Collection of Taxes Transfer Tax Order 2019 Continuance in Force Resolution 2019. Again, this Honourable House will recall that as part of the 2019-20 revenue measures, the rate of transfer tax was reduced from 5% to 2%, and the threshold for the charging of transfer tax on death was increased from $100,000 to $10 million. As this Honourable House is aware, those measures took effect on April 1st via ministerial order under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act. That order was brought to this House and was confirmed at the 31st of July sitting of the House. These measures, Mr. Speaker, are aimed at stimulating greater business and economic activity, particularly in relation to property development and real estate activity, and augment economic growth and job creation. The significant reduction in the rate of tax for transfer is complemented, for inter vivos transfer, is complemented by the increased threshold applicable to the estates of deceased persons, which currently attracts a tax of 1.5%. The 100-fold increase in the threshold will allow many of the smaller estates to be completely relieved of this tax burden and allow beneficiaries to utilize the equity in inherited property to leverage in furtherance of economic activities. Mr. Speaker, the measures have been successfully implemented by Tax Administration, and all submissions in respect of estate matters made on or after April 1st, 2019 have been benefiting from the increased threshold. Submissions made before that date but were not finalized have also been given the benefit of the new regime. In relation to the inter vivos transfers, because the material date is the date of execution, only documents executed on or after April 1st, 2019 will be subjected to the reduced rate. Mr. Speaker, in compliance with the Provisional Collection of Tax Act, the orders made under the delegated powers of the Minister of Finance have already been confirmed by this Honourable House within the time required. However, the provisional orders issued by the Minister can only last for 6 months, and in the case of the transfer tax measures, would ordinarily have expired on the 30th of September 2019. However, Mr. Speaker, the Provisional Collection of Tax Act provides that this Honourable House may, by resolution, authorize the continuance in force for an additional period of 3 months. Mr. Speaker, in order to allow for sufficient time to bring the prominent legislation for the full consideration and review of this House, and to ensure that in the meantime the provisional order continues to be legally valid, I commend the Provisional Collection of Tax Transfer Tax Order 2019 Continuation in Force Resolution 2019 to this House for approval. And Mr. Speaker, the third and final, which I wish to introduce, is the Provisional Collection of Tax Minimum Business Tax Order 2019 Confirmation and Extension Resolution. This Honourable House will recall that as part of the 2019-20 budget, the minimum business tax was to be abolished. In order to give legal effect to that policy, on the implementation date of April 1st, 2019, a ministerial order was issued under the Provisional Collection of Tax Act to reduce the rate of the minimum business tax to 0. This allowed for the suspension of all minimum business tax liabilities as at April 1st, 2019. This was used as an interim measure, as the repeal of the Act, which would effect the full abolition of the tax, can only be done by an Act of Parliament, not by delegated legislation. The tax was first introduced in 2014. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the tax of $60,000 was imposed on businesses regardless of form, regardless of whether they were profitable or not, or how long they'd been in operation, and was payable in 2 equal installments due on or before the 15th of June or the 15th of September annually. While the tax was not referable to profit, there was a threshold of $3 million of gross revenue for individuals, which was later increased to $5 million. Companies within their first 24 months of incorporation were also relieved from the liability to the minimum business tax. Persons who paid the tax could be entitled to a credit against income tax liability for the same year of assessment. Mr. Speaker, while the tax was successful in its effect on shelf companies and the amount of revenue yielded, it was criticized as being inequitable primarily because persons are liable to tax regardless of profitability. In addition, Mr. Speaker, it was a nuisance for compliant taxpayers who were forced to file separate returns for minimum business tax and income tax. In keeping with the government's thrust to continued tax reform, and in particular by focusing on the removal of the most distortionary taxes and also with the drive of incentivizing formalization and stimulating business activity, the decision was taken to remove and abolish this distortionary tax. The removal of the tax, Mr. Speaker, will no doubt reduce the cost to micro and small business and should redound to an improvement in the country's World Bank doing business ranking, particularly in the category of ease of paying taxes. The Provisional Collection of Tax Act requires provisional orders made by the Minister to be confirmed by this Honourable House within the next 30 days on which the House sits after the date of its publication in the Gazette. And consequently, the confirmation aspect of the resolution is seeking to comply with that requirement of the Act. The House is asked to note, Mr. Speaker, that even within the confirmation of this House, provisional orders have a lifespan of only 6 months. In the present case, the minimum business tax is set to expire on the 30th of September 2019. However, the Provisional Collection of Tax Act empowers this House to extend effectiveness of the order and provides that the House may, by resolution, authorize the continuance in force for an additional period of 3 months. Mr. Speaker, a bill to repeal the minimum business tax has been drafted and will be submitted to Cabinet for approval before being tabled in this House. And thanks to the Attorney General's chambers for the speed with which those have been prepared. It will go to Cabinet shortly and be brought to this House. And having given credit to the Attorney General's chambers, I'm sure she won't let us down. Mr. Speaker, in order to prevent the order lapsing before the bill can take effect as its permanent replacement, I ask that this House confirm and approve an extension to the minimum business tax order as set out in the Provisional Collection of Tax Minimum Business Tax Order 2019 Confirmation and Extension Resolution.
Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just a few thoughts on what we're doing at the moment. So essentially what has happened is that the tax reforms that the government announced in the budget debate were implemented not by primary legislation, but by orders, ministerial orders under statute on the books called the Provisional Collection of Tax Act. As the minister has indicated, if those orders are confirmed by the House, they have an initial life of 6 months and then can be extended for a further 3 months thereafter. And what we're doing today is passing a resolution to confirm them and also extend them to the end of December effectively. I'm a little perplexed by the idea of consultations going on in relation to stamp duty, because the order implementing the amendments by way of Provisional Collection of Tax Act orders is in place. That order has been gazetted. It's several pages long and it is quite elaborate, I agree, but it has been done. So I'm not sure what further consultations are being undertaken and with who, or whom. But unless there's a policy change, one would expect to see the draft amendment to the Stamp Duty Act tabled, the bill amending the Stamp Duty Act tabled, the bill amending the Transfer Tax Act tabled, and that's a very simple amendment, and the bill repealing the minimum business tax tabled, which is an extremely simple piece of legislation. We haven't seen those tabled yet. I would have liked to have seen them tabled, even if we were extending the life of the provisional orders, because the process within the House to pass them, and they have to go through both the House and the Senate, depending on parliamentary agenda and so on, may take some time. But to be extending them now at the end of 6 months after the budget, without the bills being tabled, is a disappointment to me. And I'm not saying that past performance was any better, but I'm just saying that as we move forward, we would like to see these things dealt with alacrity, and for very good reason. The primary reason is because sometimes the provisional orders lapse, and when they lapse, there are consequences to that, because tax is then collected without due authority of law. And if that happens, unless it is validated by validating legislation, taxpayers are entitled to a refund of the tax paid, for which no provision has been made in the budget. So there is a danger inherent in using these orders, these provisional orders, as a tax collecting mechanism. And we need to, I think, get into the discipline of drafting the amending legislation after the budget promptly and passing the legislation within the fiscal year after the budget has been approved. I don't see any reason why we can't do so, especially in this case, where certainly the Transfer Tax Act reform is very straightforward, and the minimum business tax is just abolished, which just means repeal the statute, essentially. There may be some transitional provision, but that is likely to be very simple as well. I take the point that the stamp duty amendments were a little bit more elaborate, but even so, they have been drafted in the form of an order, and so the amendments to the legislation by way of a bill are going to adopt many of those draft provisions, subject to whatever improvements may have been identified as necessary in the 6 months that have passed since the orders were made. So I just urge the Minister, and I know he is sympathetic to the notion of trying to get these things done quickly, because we are aware through past experience of the lapses that do occur, and then the need for validating legislation, which is essentially a waste of parliamentary time, because had we done it before on a timely basis, we wouldn't need to validate something that has been allowed to go awry. And so I'm just putting in a plug for that again. One thing I want to mention, Minister, and this relates to the stamp duty collection system. The stamp office is really a bottleneck at the moment. There are extended delays in the assessment of transactions, and that is holding up business and holding up the flow of funds pursuant to transactions, which are often large or medium or even small transactions, but significant transactions for whoever's a party to them. I know from experience where a sale agreement is sent for assessment and 2 months pass and one can't get the assessment from out of the stamp office, so that you're not collecting that revenue because it's not paid until the assessment is complete. And that is an inordinate period of time for this. And the whole thing is really delayed because there's a provision which was put into the Transfer Tax Act. It is not in the Stamp Duty Act, which allows the commissioner to assess the market value of the property if the commissioner is of the view that the consideration for the sale is not in keeping with market value. Now, it's one of those things where one wonders whether the savings that have been derived from utilization of that provision is not financially worse off than the losses that are occasioned by the delay in collecting the money on a timely basis. I must say, in my own experience, the instances in which the consideration is ultimately determined to be different from what was agreed. It's not that frequent, but the delays are very frequent. And I think this is something that needs to be dealt with, because the stamp office is the major hub, other than the titles office, which is very efficient. But the stamp office is a major bottleneck in most transactions in the economy of any formality. And so to the extent that we can improve the efficiency there, we will be enhancing our competitiveness and our growth prospects. So I commend that to you. I know there were some issues with the building. I think that there was some kind of foul smell which made the building uninhabitable sometime over the summer. I remember hearing that. But yeah, the member for Central Kingston is indicating that it's understaffed. But whatever it is, I think that solving the stamp office and making it as efficient as titles office would pay rich dividends for the fiscal accounts and Jamaica's overall competitiveness and growth prospects. Apart from that, Mr. Speaker, obviously the question of the policy underlying these orders was already the topic of discussion and debate in the budget. I won't rehash that here now. We look forward to the GCT amendments that would allow firms and individuals who are in business and have a turnover under 10 million who elect to register to do so. The Minister and I have been in correspondence on that since April. I'm still awaiting that. He's indicated it should be going to Legislation Committee shortly. Again, I urge him to push that along, because there are persons out there who want to register because they want to be able to offset the expense of the GCT that they pay on their inputs against the output tax that they collect on their sales, even if their turnover is less annually than the threshold, the new threshold, and who are being prevented from doing so. And it was agreed in the budget debate that that would be corrected, and we would allow them to register if they wish. So that needs to be done, Minister, without further delay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, you.
Thank you. I simply want to put on record my commendation to the Minister of Finance for taking these matters to the House in as timely a manner as he could, given all the many things that are outstanding. I recall very clearly, Mr. Speaker, when we sat on the other side and we had to deal with validation bills, we expressed our concern and indicated that in due course we would take another approach. And I really want to commend the Minister in respect of the three matters, the transfer tax, the stamp duty, and the minimum business tax. The extensions are coming, the continuance in force resolution, before they expire, and I have every reason to believe that the amending bills will come in time so that we do not have to deal with what we have been dealing with for decades. So let the record show I commend the Minister and his team and all who are doing differently, because we committed to the people of Jamaica to do differently. May it so please you.
Mr. Speaker, just express thanks to the opposition, the member on the opposite side and the member from St. James for contributions to the debate. An honest approach to this would acknowledge the substantial problems that we have had over a long period of time with tax measures introduced at the time of a budget, provisional orders put in place, and those provisional orders have been lapsed. I have here, Mr. Speaker, a list from 2002, 2004, 2005, 6, 7, 11, 13, 15, 14 of various measures. Transfer tax, change in transfer tax rate from 2005 to 2013, change in stamp duty rate from 2002 to 2013, spirits license duties and fees in 2004, road traffic fees in 2002, petroleum and oil fees in 2004, and a lot of the measures that were introduced at the start of the EFF in 2013 by way of provisional orders, for which the permanent legislation does not yet exist. And in many of these cases, I don't want to, some of those orders need to be validated. Okay? Yes, it is. Yeah, need to be validated. So I'm starting from a position where, as alluded to in the presentation by the member on the other side, past practice has not been very good in this regard. I'm trying to make a break that all of the tax measures that have been introduced in my budget, right, will not lapse, one, and we will make them permanent. That is where we have to start. And in my attempt to do so, I look forward to the cooperation of all in this House and for an honest conversation about it. When I bring stuff here, I think the fact that I am making a change from past practice should be recognized. It's an honest thing to do. And then when we turn our attention to the long list of measures, over 20, that have to be validated from prior periods, from the prior government before that, and the government before that, and the one before that, that we have the cooperation of this House to get these through. Some of them will be tedious and wordy, but they're absolutely necessary for good governance. Mr. Speaker, the member spoke about the consultations for the Stamp Duty Act. The reason why the consultations are being sought is that, in addition, the policy is the policy and that won't change, but in addition to the policy where the ad valorem stamp duty was abolished and new flat fees introduced, there are certain administrative changes that we're going to make at the same time to bring the archaic nature of the Stamp Duty Act in accordance with newer legislation that we have on the books, such as the Companies Act and so forth. And some of those administrative changes require stakeholder consultation before we bring it. The stamp duty, the permanent legislation for the Stamp Duty Act is the only one that falls into that category. All of the others are pretty straightforward, and the AG has, well, the member from... She needs to step up her game. No, don't be... As I said, member, we're going to be fair and honest about this. In this administration, with your cooperation, we're making a change. We are going to ensure, first and foremost, that the measures introduced in this budget for the first time will be made, let me rephrase it. We were going to make sure that the measures introduced in this budget are made permanent. From the mere fact that, and I have here I can show you, for the mere fact that I can give you the years 2002, 2004, 2005, almost virtually every year since 2002, there is at least one act for which the provisional order has expired. So I think I am within reason to postulate, and I can prove it, that this is likely to be, but we're making a break from this very spotty past. And in doing so, we hope we can have your cooperation on a very honest basis. When we're doing it and making it forward, you know what I'm saying. With respect to the operation of the stamp office, we're going to move eventually towards a more risk-based assessment. So the commissioner doesn't have to get the market value for every single thing that comes to the office, but on a risk basis have the discretion to do so. But in addition to that, going to introduce measures or procedures where we measure. What gets measured gets done. I want to have data that says 30% of the things that came were dealt with in a day, 80% were dealt with in 4 or 5 days, 20% were dealt with in over 4 weeks, as an example. And when we have data that's measured and can be made public, then we can drive for further efficiency gains. But it is a that is certainly an objective. That's an objective that we, the volumes are very high, Mr. Speaker, through you, Mr. Speaker. The volumes are very high as a result of the measures being introduced and the volume of economic activity, which is visible. You can see a lot of sort of construction and other related activity, and that high volume, the previous method of validating every value doesn't really work as well with elevated volumes. And in a regime where, certainly for stamp duty, it's just a flat fee and transfer tax is only 2% versus the 9% overall. So we're making adjustments in procedure and measuring to deal with the increase in volume so that the public can be better served. But, Mr. Speaker, I thank the members for the debate, and I would ask you to put the resolutions, I don't know if they can be put en bloc, if not, put them individually to the House for consent, affirmation, or approval.
Members, Minister, well, we're going to put them, well, we put the first, Provisional Collection of Tax, Minimum Business Tax, Order 2019. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Provision of Collection of Taxes, Transfer Tax 2019. That's the second one. To continue in force. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. The Provision of Collection of Tax, Stamp Duty Order 2019, continuation in force. Resolution made now put. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. As of it.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to do further business today. I ask the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday. That is what the third. The second. What? Tuesday was the first? Yes, that the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday.
Members, the House be adjourned, right? A resolution for adjournment until the 1st of October at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Honourable House stands adjourned.
Once you're in the union and you're still talking about the number of children you plan to have, it's too late.
Yeah. She doesn't already yet, so you don't have a right to tell her every time, no.
So she's forced to marry her cousin, and his family,
her cousins,
held her down so the man could rape her.
It's like we look